Welcome to Private Kitchen. My name is Alexa, and co-hosting with me we have Simon, the Koning, music supervisor.
Thank you.
And in this issue dedicated to film, we are honored to welcome a film composer, Han Otten. Han has worked in numerous scores in film. He also has given his great contribution to contemporary dance and other sorts of media. When he was still studying, he has composed a score for a short film, which later was nominated for a student Oscar. And in the span of his amazing career, he has worked with numerous directors and orchestras, including cult film director Peter Greenaway. Welcome, Han. It's an honor to have you here. And just to make your life even more complicated, can you resume your composing style in a few couple sentences?
My composing style?
Yeah.
The style is, there's lots of small elements which define my style, but I think the style in general is really dependent on the type of film you do, which is part of the profession, of course. It's really an inherent part of being film composers to go where the film goes. So it's a bit hard to say that is my style. When I do a psychological thriller, it's really different from a comedy,
Yeah. But is the hybrid style or the fact that you develop your own sounds, is that also the reason why clients ask you?
Yes, I think so, because it leads to a really personal kind of typical thing. But I think clients also ask me because I just can really dive into their world of their film and just sort of make it my own. I think that's also a reason that they ask me.
Is there any social skill that a composer needs to have? He needs to be a diplomat?
Yeah, really. I think last year I looked at a Hollywood Roundtable thing that's organized by Hollywood Reporter. It's a Hollywood magazine with a lot of truly famous film composers. And the thing that really struck me was that they are really nice, humble guys. All these guys are ridiculously almost humble and nice. And even people like Hans Zimmer, who are kind of rock stars of film music, are down to earth and nice people. And even I remember there was Danny Elfman was there, who was really world famous composer, who said he really. Every time Tim Burton came in the studio and he had to present his first cues, he was really scared to death each time. So that means their ego is I think one of the guys said, my ego comes pre-shrunk. You don't have to, if you have, your ego can get in the way. You need to be flexible and empathetic.
Yeah, but there is, on the one hand, you have to support the movie with your work, but on the other hand, you also have your own personal artistic ego. So how do you balance that? Because you also need that artistic elements.
That in fact can be quite problematic, because right from the start, when you start doing music for films, especially when you're doing student films, you get a really wide-ranging styles of films. Each time, you get horror stuff, and you get comedies, and you get thrillers, and feel-good stuff. And so, right from the start, you get this quite schizophrenic kind of palette of stuff which you need to support. So you need to be really careful in cherishing your own stylistic things. If you find something which is otherwise you just get torn apart every time. And if you just go with every film and just go along with that, you can start to lose yourself if your style isn't so defined. It's a bit of an eclectic job, so to say. So if you have eclectic tendencies, which I did have, you have to be careful, because it's really boosting that.
You can go everywhere.
You can go everywhere every time.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you need to be prepared to go into this film and really support that kind of the idea the director had. So it can be quite a split, between it's careful. You have to balance those things out.
Yeah. And since we are talking about kitchens,
Yeah.
is there any recipe that you use personally?
It's really important to talk with the director beforehand and see what she or he wants with the film. And and then actually I have to say there's not really a recipe. It's just the thing with music is that it's really hard to talk about it. It's the famous Laurie Anderson quote. It's like dancing about architecture, talking about music. So you better start right away making things, then you can present it.
Yeah.
Film composing is really unique compared to, I think, almost all the other aspects of filmmaking, because the director is present when the creation, the thing itself starts up. So the director looks through the lens of the cameraman. The director is present when the actors do their thing and try to head them his or her way. But with film composing, this is really different. The film composer makes the actual notes, and the director is not present. He's just there's quite a giant leap of faith the director has to have in you, because he leaves you alone. You just talk about music, which is really hard to do, and you just start making things, and he or she comes back. You have a meeting, and he just can say, well, cool or not good, and then he goes again.
But he might have certain expectations of you, like,
of course.
And how do you manage that?
Yeah, but that's actually a good thing. I think that's also the reason that when you have this trust, this bond, you can just safely know that you will try your best to serve the film. I think when directors have found someone who they can communicate with, they tend to stick to that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because now with Marionette, I did really a long time ago. I did a graduating film, this Marionette World, and now we sort of come full circle because he comes back to, well, we also had our rough moments in the past, but anyhow, directors still want to continue that because it's really hard for them to start all over again with someone, and again they'll have to leave him or her alone in the studio making notes. He won't be present. So again, this.
Yeah, it's a matter of trust.
Yeah,
yeah, really.
But still, then he might have certain expectations, which are sometimes also inherent on making movies. That a movie needs a certain cliché, for example.
Yeah.
But how do you keep these clichés? How do you keep these interesting? That's also your job, maybe, because he needs this tension in a certain scene, but you need to make that sound interesting. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a matter of there's lots of parameters you just need to. I mean, of course, first you need to be inspired by the acting. In this case, it was especially Tekla, she's so amazing. You need believable acting. If an actor acts in a way that you believe it's much easier to be inspired with the music. And then you just need to find your inspiration. Just need to see if you can get that vitals of the scene and see if you can sort of lift that up, because that's what music does. It can't completely change a scene, but it can lift the scene tremendously.
And when do you join the project? Is it in the script phase? Are you going on set? Is when you
Sometimes
have the rough cut?
Sometimes in the script there's a scene in which a band plays or something like that. And I really like this holistic idea of making all this music connected. So I like to compose things on set and then use those themes again in the film music, in the dramatic music. The viewers just see 1.5 hours or 2 hours of the film, and your music needs to stick in their minds. So it's really good to hammer those themes right from the start. So it's good when all the scenes and all kinds of matters, the music which is used as on set has the same themes. I think that can be quite a strong concept.
Yeah.
And if, for example, we were creating a soup, do you have any ingredients that you put before in terms of instruments or musical influence when you start a score?
Yeah, that's really, really dependent on the sort of film you're doing. For instance, for this film, we used a lot of flute.
So that was your potatoes, let's say.
Yeah, sort of ingredients. And well, we see later on when we look at some fragments, but I used a lot of microtonality, like lots of microtonal stuff.
Yeah.
And this was really suited well. This suited this film really well because with microtonality you have this inherent fakeness because these tones literally fall in between our normal.
Yeah. Simon, I think he wants to talk
maybe.
lot about your microtonalities.
Okay.
I think we're going to listen to an example later on, and then we can go further into detail.
Yeah, and also the flute, for instance, was important this time because we, especially the bass flute, we used a couple of times, which has this really mysterious, deep, noisy quality to it, which really fitted this because the film has some kind of a bit of a Hitchcock kind of old-fashioned, timeless look. And I really, the bass flute fitted that nicely, I think.
And you often work with real orchestras, or when you're writing your score in your studio, how do you know that the people who are going to actually play this, that they can actually do this, and that are you trying to imagine how it's going to sound, or how do you?
Yeah, that's a matter of a lot of experience. We just, when I started out, I just tried a lot of things. I still do that. I always make one orchestral cue, which is called trip effects, and I just try all kinds of weird things with orchestration and see where the limits are of the musicians.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, you never quite know if they can play it, but I like to look for the limits of the musicians.
But technology is so.
Love it.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a very good idea to sort of explore the limits of an orchestra, and that's the bandwidth you can work with.
Yeah.
But technology these days is so good.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you still use an orchestra?
Well, certain things are the holistic feeling of an orchestra, that there are 60 people doing one expression together. That's still not doable and not manageable, not recreatable with electronics.
Yeah. Do you also write the individual sheet music for the orchestra, or do you work with people?
Yeah, but it's not so hard anymore.
Okay.
You can easily derive, when you just work on a score, you can easily derive the parts from it. That's not a big thing, not a big deal. But I do that, I really take pride in doing that myself. Also because you get these idiosyncratic things in which are vital for your style.
Yeah, and you are also the conductor yourself?
No,
Okay.
I don't do that.
Okay.
Could have done that, but that's another specialization.
Yeah, it's another.
Which takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And now I want to talk about bad things. Your mistakes. What was the biggest mistake, and what you have learned with it throughout your career?
The biggest mistake?
Yeah, that one that's...
I cannot think of some really big mistake I did, which I still regret.
Yeah. Or things that keep on coming back, like you, or maybe you have any advice, things you to avoid mistakes.
I used to completely ignore temp tracks. For instance, temp tracks is the music which is put in the edit film of the film.
As an example.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the director, these things can be a tremendous nuisance because the director likes them and starts loving them and wants exactly that. I used to completely neglect them. I just didn't listen to them at all. Because I think when you start doing the same, if you start repeating or try to match the temp tracks, you always get to a certain 80, 90%, but then the temp tracks will be better. Sometimes a director wants to say something with the type of temp track he chooses. And lately I started listening to them more, especially when you have these there's a certain type of temp track which is used for important sequences. This is mostly Trent Reznor or Hans Zimmer kind of, which has this continuous momentum, this continuous drive, very small snippets of themes, and which get repeated all the time. And when you have that, when you stumble upon that type of temp track, you have to take that and use that yourself. So I've changed my ways in that sense. I sort of copy that structure, because if you just do your own thing, people always miss that moment, because they have this great build-up. Especially Hans Zimmer is really good at that. Very simple thing, but then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. When you don't copy that, they will always miss that type of drive.
But then the expectations of the director as well. Right?
Of course.
And the editor that cuts everything perfectly to fit.
Yeah, it can be really hard with a director and an editor, because you need to focus on both. And sometimes the director is so fond of the tastes and the style of the editor that he wants to. He just is more focused on his opinion than his own, almost. So that can be quite hard to focus.
Do you sometimes work with a music supervisor as well, or?
I never had to deal with those.
Okay.
That's more of a Hollywood thing. It's not in here in the Netherlands. It's seldomly used.
Yeah.
I was talking with Simon, and now I want to know if it's true. Is it true the directors, when they get to your hands, in the end of the process, they are a little bit broken down? In some way, psychologically?
Well, it's the very last thing, which is also, in terms of deadline, always a big issue. Yeah. Because everything shifts your way, but the deadline stands, and so it gets less and less
shortened.
time.
So you also are a little bit a psychologist.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, there's the being a nice guy again. I mean, it's vital, because they can be. On the other hand, they're doing the grading, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. So they're still very busy. So you have to be careful with that. Yeah, you have to be really nice.